Hello there, everybody, and thanks so much for joining us for one of our weekly 3M focused webinars. My name is Sam, and I will be your moderator today. In just a minute, we'll be joined by Wesley Boudreaux, who is going to be offering his insights and sharing the story of a couple he helped successfully retire at the age of 59. He'll also be sharing some experience and advice to help you hopefully do the same. But before Wesley comes on, I'd like to very quickly remind you that we are not affiliated nor endorsed whatsoever by 3M. We are a completely independent group of financial advisors. Please keep that in mind as you're listening along. After Wesley's presentation, he will also be answering some questions, so feel free to ask away. It's completely anonymous, and he'll answer as many questions as he can, time permitted. And if you happen to see the YouTube cards popping up on your screen, feel free to click on those. They're going to guide you to different resources we have available to you, one of which may simply be a link to book an appointment with Wesley or one of his colleagues, if you wish, after this video has ended. And without further ado, here is Wesley Boudreaux.
Hey, Samantha, thank you for that introduction. Like she said, we're going to be talking about really our cash flow analysis or our financial plan that we provide for clients as well as prospects, complimentary. And I'll kind of walk you through the story of John and Jan. Change the names. I'm not going to give you their full date of birth and everything like that, obviously, but it gives you kind of a quick, typical story of what we see when we sit down with individuals that are trying to figure out, okay, can I retire? Am I on the right track to retire? What changes do I need to make? And what's it going to look like over the next 20, 30, maybe 40 years in retirement? So we'll kind of walk you through that, but obviously take this as an example. Everybody's unique and different, so it gives you an idea of what that process looks like. But it's really important if you've got questions for yourself that we can kind of set some time to go through this on a one-on-one basis for you as well. So we'll talk about them. We'll talk about some typical considerations you need to look at when you're planning for the future and going from accumulation to distribution. And we'll give you a summary and then talk about that planning process as well. Excuse me. So first, John and Jan, again, I mentioned kind of changed the names, and I'm not going to give you their date of birth, but they're typical. They are actually not too far apart in age. I think it was about 10 months or so, if I recall. But John was about 57, Jan about 56, and they called in. They were originally having questions about John's pension plan and wondering, okay, when's the right time to actually retire and elect this pension plan? Their initial thoughts have always been that, hey, we're going to work till age 62. That's when we can turn on Social Security. They had questions about, is it best to turn Social Security on at 62 or should we defer to 67? That's a whole nother story, but it does incorporate itself into the cash flow analysis. So we do provide a Social Security analysis as well. We can get into that later if you have questions on it. But ultimately, they were thinking 62, but lo and behold, they've had a couple of grandkids popping out here recently, and they just had their second one. It was about, I think, 2-3 months ago or so when we first sat down and did this plan. So they were curious, okay, could we retire a little bit earlier? They were thinking about age 59 because they knew they had heard about 59 and a half being the rule where you can take distributions without the 10% penalty. I'll elaborate on that a little bit here later in this webinar. But again, they've actually done a great job. John was lucky enough to have both a 401k and a pension. Jan, in this case, didn't have a pension option, but she did have a 401k she's been saving to. They've also got their expenses are going to likely reduce in retirement. They've been doing a good job of saving, and they've been paying down their mortgage. They've only got about 5 years left of that mortgage. So that will actually drop off in retirement. So we looked at some of these figures that they gave us. I'll show you in a moment, and kind of did some napkin math and realized, hey, they're probably going to be in good shape. Let's figure out what does it look like from a long-term perspective and put a plan together. So based upon those initial goals and gathering some of the data from them, usually what happens is we'll, it depends upon how much information you have offhand. Once we start having a conversation, if you're curious about this, we can kind of jot down some of the numbers you may have high level. If you want to dig deeper into the details, we can send you some information, how to run a full budget worksheet, how to log in, find your different data, whether it be your 401ks, your pension assets, outside assets, things like that. And then we can really get into the weeds on that if you want to, or you can keep it high level depending upon what you know. But just in that initial conversation, they had some of their figures. So we kind of talked about it just with experience and running simple napkin math. I would let them know that, hey, given what you guys are trying to achieve, you're going to be okay. The question, though, is what's it going to look like? It's one thing to say, okay, hey, we can take a, say 4% withdrawal rate or something like that and survive. But it's another thing to say, okay, well, how much money will we have in 20, 30, 40 years? What are our goals? Do we want to write our last check on our deathbed? Do we want to pass it all to the kids? Do we want to pass some to the kids, some of the beneficiaries? Do we want to actually pass some of the money along to the kids while we're alive so we can enjoy the benefit of giving to those children? Do we want to support the grandchildren? There's a lot of different variations in which you can actually look at. And also, once we run those numbers, we back into, okay, yeah, it's one thing to have that money, but it's another thing to keep that money. What are taxes going to look like? Are we able to efficiently manage this portfolio so that way you're taking distributions so that you maximize what you get versus what Uncle Sam gets out of there as well? So again, it's really important to kind of run through those and see what all those different possibilities are, and not just say, hey, yeah, I'm okay, let's move into the investment philosophy. By running through a cash flow analysis, that'll let us know what you need to achieve, and then we can help you with the investments more appropriately from there. So this is a quick kind of a glance or a list of some of the things we'll end up needing for that cash flow analysis. Like I said, a lot of these you might have on the top of your head. Others you may need to go back and log in and find some of that information, and we can set some time to do that at a follow-up call. But generally speaking, obviously names, dates of birth. We want to look at what you're planning for, your age, your desired retirement date. So I left this blank. We talked about John and Jan. They actually had initial one, then a potential secondary one, and then we'll talk about a third one that we really kind of uncovered through this process. And the biggest one is your desired spending. So I need everybody to make sure they do focus on that, because that's one of the biggest pitfalls we run into is individuals saying, hey, I'm going to spend $5,000 or $6,000 a month, plus taxes and inflation. But in the reality, they turn around, they retire, and they start spending, $6,500. They spend extra $1,000 or extra $2,000 a month, and that very quickly can have a long-term effect on the portfolio structure and the cash flow analysis. So it's really important to understand that, and we tend to suggest that you gross up to be more conservative there as well. We want to make sure that we do plan for inflation in this standpoint. We'll talk about that also. Excuse me. What source of income do you have? Are you or do you have Social Security? Most of us are going to have Social Security, or maybe a federal pension or a state pension if you're a teacher or work for the state or the federal government. What type of assets do you have? Have you saved it in a 401k plan? Are you lucky enough to have a pension plan? Have you saved outside towards retirement, whether it be a brokerage account, a bank account, an annuity, real estate? There's a lot of different options there. And at the end of the day, the question is, okay, do I have enough between my Social Security and whatever other source of income I may have, whether it may be rental income or my own personal annuity, or maybe part-time work as well? We didn't mention in here. A lot of people do retire, and they go back and get part-time work, maybe not because they need it, but just because they want something to enjoy, because they've gotten bored possibly or so. A lot of times when we talk to individuals, they're busier than ever in retirement. So again, everybody's unique and different. And in some cases, one of the spouses may want the other one out of the house for a little bit of time, so they go and get a part-time job. So all those things can get factored in here, but ultimately you need to make sure your combination of your income sources and your ability to draw from your assets meets those spending needs, and it'll meet those over the next 20, 30, 40 years or so. So let's get back to John and Jan. I'll give you some updated numbers for them. Now, obviously, I kind of rounded some of these to make it simpler for this, but I'm not going to give you their dates of birth, but they were 57 and 56 here this year. And again, the desired date was initially looking at age 62 because they thought that's kind of coinciding with Social Security. But then they said, with these grandkids coming along, can we go earlier? Let's look at about a year and a half out at 59 or 59 and a half. Can we do that? So that's what we were focused on. As far as their spending, like I mentioned, they had that mortgage that's going to get paid off. They're spending about $6,000 a month on their normal expenses, and they got about $1,500 a month on that mortgage. And I want to stress, when you have a mortgage, we want to know what the principal and interest payment is, because that will eventually be paid off. Plus, it doesn't grow with inflation. Now, obviously, we still have, you've got your property taxes and your insurance on there. That's still going to remain, and it's going to grow with inflation as well. But their income, actually a pretty healthy income, both of them. John had $120,000 and Jan's making about $80,000. So this is the first thing that kind of jumps out to me when I'm talking with somebody. Between the two of them, they got about $200,000 of income, but they're telling me, hey, Wesley, we're only going to spend $6,000, maybe $7,500 of spending in the first couple of years retirement, then drop down to $6,000. So there's a bit of a disconnect there. Obviously, even if you factor in taxes and contributions to 401ks, they were likely bringing in more than that $7,500. So I'd want to just double check, make sure that those are accurate numbers. They can get by with only that $6,000 plus $1,500, or do we need to gross that up? Now, they actually told me, I think it was about $5,700, so we grossed that up to $6,000. And the beauty of the tool is that when we run through here, we'll back into the max spending levels, so you kind of know what your thresholds are as well. So you don't have to be 100% accurate on that first trial. I usually call that the rough draft, if you would. We go through the process, figure out where we are, and we can make some tweaks and deviations from there. Excuse me. So their retirement assets, actually, we're talking about the spending. They had both been taking advantage of catch-up contributions, so they have been saving a little bit more recently here. But John's got his portfolio, his 401k, up a little bit over $600,000. The pension lump sum option came out to about $800,000, and Jan's 401k is about $480,000. They've got some cash on the side in the savings account, excess savings about $50,000, and a brokerage account about $100,000 they have at Schwab, which actually is the same firm we use for clearing. So fast forward, if you're working with us, most of the accounts we work with, we will have them on the Charles Schwab platform. So it's making it easy with that conversation with them as well, because they know how that platform works. As far as retirement income, they didn't have their Social Security estimates. But if you've got your Social Security statements, we can grab it from there, or again with that income as well as the your date of birth, we can run an estimate. We were going to look at 62 for them. We'll also compare 67, so they know those options. And for that pension we talked about with John, he has the option of either taking a lump sum or an annuity. And the joint and survivor annuity option we looked at was $3,700 a month, starting at 58, and $3,900 at 60. So we're kind of between there, and using that for the actual plan as well. And as I mentioned, going back to that income, that also can, if you're, let's say, if you've got 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 years to retirement, by understanding your income and what percentage you're contributing to your 401k, we also factor that in. So you may have a couple more years of additional savings. We might put in there, okay, you're putting in 10%, company matches 3%, so 13% of, let's say, $100,000 is getting saved for the next couple of years as well prior to retirement. So some of the different things that we're looking for in this case was just running 2 scenarios and then potentially more beyond that. So really the scenario was they want to see if they can do 59. That 62 is now out the window if they can. We talked about napkin math saying they probably would be okay. So they want to see what the long-term aspect looks like for age 59. And the question becomes, okay, on John's pension, does he take the annuity or the lump sum? So instead of just, having a guess or saying, hey, I want one or the other, we decided to run 2 different reports to show those side by side so we can see how it looks in the long run. And we do have a lot of other webinars going on pensions, and also if you've got company specific pensions, we can go through those details. But generally speaking, the annuity is going to be beneficial for you if you want longevity protection, because it's going to continue to pay for the rest of your life. However, inflation is going to erode that over time. Also, you're not going to have a cost of living adjustment in there usually. And then again, God forbid something happens to you sooner rather than later, then the company can keep a lot of that. The pension lump sum is going to give you more flexibility for management of it on your own, distribution to your beneficiaries in a better manner. But it does come with some risk if you mismanage that or spend through it too quickly. So these are all conversations to have, and running the cash flow analysis is a good way to do that. And the alternatives would be, like I said, that cash flow analysis will back into what's the max you could spend and as soon as you can retire. So we'll have a conversation about that with them. And then if we want to run any alternate scenarios, we can do that. As far as the typical things to consider when you're looking at a cash flow analysis or a financial plan, to remind us and let us know, and we'll go through this with you, is longevity. That's a big one. So the biggest risk to a retirement portfolio is living longer, making it to age 100, 110, who knows? But again, everybody's different. I've got clients that, they've got parents and grandparents that made it into late 90s, even their hundreds or so. Got others that unfortunately are, second generation factory workers, and they don't have much expectation making it to their 80s. So it's really important to understand that. And again, that's different from couple to couple. You might have a husband that doesn't have longevity on his side, and you got a wife that does have longevity on her side, and she may be a little bit younger. So you got to plan for those different age breakdowns and not just focus on that one person. Look at that long-term aspect and making sure that he or she is taken care of if you were to pass away as well. What are your spending needs? Again, we focus on what do you need, and we gross up inflation and taxes there. But a lot of times it's focused on the needs versus wants. Sometimes we want to make sure our needs are covered by Social Security or maybe another form of guaranteed income. And also it could be fixed or variable. So let's go back to John and Jan. Another aspect, and we talked about this after running the first scenario, is, okay, what if maybe they want to spend, an extra $15,000 a year on traveling for the first 10 years, then maybe drop that down to, $7,000 or $10,000 for the next 10 years. Maybe they wanted to add in a new car every 10 years. Maybe you've got a daughter that's getting married in a couple of years. You have to pay for a wedding, unfortunately. There's a lot of different things you can put in there, so we can be as detailed or as generic as you want to, but we need to start somewhere, obviously. As I mentioned, we gross up for taxes. The rate of returns, we tend to look at a very conservative rate of return. We do run a Monte Carlo simulation, so you can see variations. But generally speaking, we back into saying, okay, let's just run a 5% rate of return to be very conservative, 5 or 6%, and we can actually guarantee 5% right now in money markets even. So if you're looking at that, then we know if we're going to tell you, hey, you've got the ability to retire now, we're going to be certain about that. We're not taking any additional risk and running it for, let's say, an 8% return, which is very subjective and could be detrimental to telling somebody, hey, you could retire if you think you're going to expect an 8% return forever. Then it also brings in distribution plan. I mentioned before, how do we actually take out those assets? What are some of the tax beneficial strategies? What account do we take it from, or what combination do we take it from? RMDs come up, whether you are going to be at 73 or 75, you'll be forced to start taking withdrawals eventually. And that backs into whether we want to look at Roth conversions prior to that. And then your legacy planning. Are you, again, looking to write that last check and be happy about it? Or are you looking to plan for a legacy, whether it be for your kids or church or charities, or a combination of those? We get into all those different options and how estate planning can affect that as well. So a couple charts here, just worth noting. One of the biggest things to remember is, where are you going to retire? We work with a lot of individuals that may retire in one state and stay there, or they may retire from one state and move elsewhere. Let's take an example of California. You've got the ability, if you want to, you've got pretty high income tax on the state level there, but you can slide right across the border to Nevada if you want to reduce some of those taxes, or maybe move to Texas. So it's really important to let us know, where you're going to be retiring ultimately, so we factor in those state taxes as well. I also mentioned about the distribution strategy. Generally speaking, most tools you run and most people you talk to are going to say, hey, defer taxes as long as you can. You don't want to pay taxes. So usually what's going to happen is they're going to suggest taking your taxable accounts out first. So for John and Jan, that example would be plowing through their savings and their brokerage account before they tap into their IRAs or 401ks. But in reality, that's not the right thing to do, because what happens is, yes, it saves you taxes the first couple of years, but now you've exhausted those sources, and now everything's going to be taxed. A combination of your Social Security and your retirement distributions from your IRAs. Another way to do that would be kind of looking at the tax brackets year by year and taking out what makes sense for your specific tax bracket. So even if you didn't have even if you just took out, let's say for John and Jan, if you just took out the standard deduction, you're not going to pay any tax on that whatsoever. So you can take out over $20,000 and have it tax free. Then you can factor in, okay, well, they're based upon their spending, they're going to be in that 12% tax bracket in retirement. I'd argue that's a pretty favorable tax bracket. Likely they may go higher down the road. So we might say, let's max out that 12% tax bracket, take out distributions from there. And it could be that we even take out more and do Roth conversions. We can get into that in another scenario as well. So that way we're able to mitigate potential future taxes for themselves and their beneficiaries as well. So again, very important to understand how to take that money out. So let's go ahead and jump back to John and Jan, kind of wrap up their situation. So they're lucky enough to live in Texas, where there's no state taxes. So they're just focused on federal taxes in here. And again, the plans we ran were to retire at age 59, and they both were in great shape. We ran those plans. They could have retired at 59 and had excess savings beyond age 100. They both had longevity, so we ran it that far out. Again, you can tell us run it to 90, 95. You can tell us run it to 120 if you want to. It's really up to you. Focus on longevity. But so they have the ability where they can either retire earlier, spend more, or a combination. They could actually retire earlier and spend more, which is what we looked at when we ran the second scenario here, the ability for them to actually retire here later this year, still at age 58 or so. But each of the scenarios also brought up the conversation around Roth conversions, as well as RMD planning and the taxation strategies, which also backs into the pension planning options as well. So this is kind of a quick just example of one of the charts that we see on the cash flow analysis. The top one's going to be the plan one we ran, assuming they took the lump sum. The bottom one is assuming they took the annuity. And one of the biggest things you'll kind of see or jump out is that difference of orange and dark blue on there. So the orange is them taking withdrawals from their accounts, whether it be the IRA or 401k. And the blue, excuse me, the blue is their guaranteed income. So Social Security and potentially that pension. So what we see is in that bottom one, there's a lot more dark blue, and it's essentially meeting their retirement needs because they've got that guaranteed Social Security and the annuity. And then the change of that light blue, and then you see kind of a jump up in that black line, that's their expenses. It jumps up because that's where the RMD kicks in. They're forced to start taking withdrawals whether they want to or not. And that RMD forces them to take out more than they need, which in turn bumps up their tax brackets as well. So it forces them to pay more taxes than they otherwise would probably want to. So this still gives us, 13, 14 years of planning ahead of us as far as looking at Roth conversions and strategies to kind of whittle down that IRA so they can actually have tax-free income for themselves and their beneficiaries versus getting hit with that RMD at a level they may not be comfortable with. And who knows where tax brackets will be at that point in time as well. So again, going back to these, the outcome's very similar to both. They both had plenty of money at the end. The question becomes, do we want that guaranteed income for life, or do we want the flexibility to take that lump sum and manage it on our own? For the pros or cons on there, and the ability to actually potentially maybe make more off of that and have a cost of living adjustment on there versus that annuity. So again, it's important to run these side by side and have a conversation through there. So what are they actually doing? They are elected to actually retire sooner after going through this and understanding, hey, they're in good shape. They can actually retire sooner. They're retiring this year and focus on spending some more time with those 2 grandkids and the expectations that more may be along the way. However, we looked at the pros and cons of the pension for John. And even though we're not making the ultimate decision right now, they're wanting the flexibility of that pension as the lump sum so that they can control that. They can control it for tax purposes, for distribution planning purposes, for passing on to beneficiaries. Chances are we'll look at probably outperforming that annuity over the long term. When we run those reports, we run them, like I said, at 5%. So that's a very safe rate of return. At that rate of return, the annuity and the lump sum look about similar, but if you get about 5.5%, 6%, which is still fairly safe rate of return, that lump sum is going to start to look better and better. But I will be cautious about the 2 biggest things I do see and mistakes on people taking that lump sum is if you are managing yourself and you're too aggressive and you could lose some of that money or all of it, or if you've got spending issues or you got family that may come tapping on the door saying, hey, can you help us out? I've seen both of those situations, unfortunately, where people do plow through that money too quickly. At the end of the day, we're here to manage it for them and kind of police them and tell them what to do and how to do it, but you can still take it and do whatever you want when you want. So be very careful about that. And one of the things I didn't bring up before is they're both, if they're retiring here, 58 and 57, they're both under 59.5. So we need to be careful about how do they take distributions and avoid that 10% penalty that happens up until 59.5. So that's another benefit of working with the retirement group. As fiduciaries, we're not going to say, hey, roll everything over to an IRA so we can manage it for you, and that's in our best interest. We're going to focus on how we mitigate the taxes and the tax penalties. So we're going to tell them to actually keep some money in their 401k to bridge that ability from 58 and 57 to 59.5. So that way they can take distributions from the 401k, taking advantage of the age 55 rule. If you retire from a company age 55 or later, you can take distributions without that 10% penalty. So in summary, we'll wrap this up and see if we have any questions. A lot of times, many people, they come to us just with kind of a guess or an estimate of what they think they need to meet their goals. And sometimes they don't even have all the questions that they need. So you may think you're somewhere. It's really important to, kind of have a conversation with us and take advantage of that complementary cash flow analysis, because at a minimum, it can at least confirm what you thought. So in the case of John and Jan, it kind of confirmed what they thought, but also took it a step further, telling them, hey, they're in better shape. They can do something different if they want to. And really, at the end of the day, what it did is just meant that they were able to retire a little bit earlier. And yes, it did cost them some money in the long run, but it cost them a little bit of money passed on to beneficiaries. So it may come down to the question, okay, what's an extra year of retirement, a year and a half or 2 years of retirement value worth to me versus working just to pass more money onto to my kids. So again, it's really important to kind of run that review and see what it looks like on paper. And we can then talk about the emotional aspects of when's the right time for you to retire, and look at running some different approaches if you want to see different variables in there as well. So unfortunately, right now, about 3/4 of Americans over 50 don't have a written plan. The process, if you give us a call or email us to start that process, is have a conversation with myself or one of our other advisors. We'll go through some of those questions. If you have all the information, great. Otherwise, we can email you what we need to get. Once we get the numbers back from you, that could take, could take a 10-minute conversation, or it could take you emailing it back to us or calling us back. Give us about a week to put those numbers together, and we'll set some time to run through that. And like I said, I call that the first draft, and we can go through and make some tweaks if you want to. But ultimately, hopefully, we're going to show you that you are on the right path to meet those goals. And then ultimately, if you want to deviate from that, and also help us if you got, let's say, a pension or 401k, how do you actually distribute those in that retirement process? Do you have NUA discussions on your 401k? Do you have a lump sum versus annuity? We go through all those with you. But we talked about all that stuff, but don't forget who the retirement group is. We are an independent financial advisory firm that focus on working with Fortune 500 companies. As Samantha said at the beginning, even though we've worked extensively with a lot of these companies for over 30 years, does not mean we're endorsed or employed by them, but we do have extensive history of working with them. So most of our advisors will have detailed knowledge of the company plans, whether it be the pension, the 401k, healthcare, retiree medical benefits, insurance continuation, things like that. We do have offices throughout the country, so rest assured, if you need to sit down with somebody face to face, we can likely accommodate that. But obviously, this day and age, it's easy to have web meetings or phone calls to get the ball rolling and get this first draft, if you would, put together. And then at the end of the day, we've talked all about this complementary cash flow analysis. So that's the one thing to take us up on. And it's important to understand what your goals are and what you're trying to achieve before anybody backs into giving you investment recommendations and advice. But a lot of times we'll look at this in conjunction with reviewing your 401k and your allocation there as well. So I'll see if we have any questions come through, but while we do that, I'll leave these up on the screen. We got a couple QR codes to access our LinkedIn page if you want to follow along there, get more company specific information. If you'd like to schedule an appointment with myself or one of the other advisors, you can use the other QR code here, and you can reach that info@theretirementgroup.com, and our number is 800-900-5867.
Thank you, Wesley. I think that's really cool to see it really puts it in perspective to get to see an example like that. So thank you.
Yeah, and they don't take, they're not as intensive on your end as
Right.
what you may think, just so people know that. Like I said, it could be literally 5 minutes or 10 minutes of gathering some data, and then we can get that detailed plan
Yeah.
together.
Yeah. And it's definitely worth it. Alrighty. Yeah, we're just going to answer a couple questions and we're going to try to keep it short. First one, how can I handle health insurance until I'm eligible for Medicare if I'm retiring before the typical age?
Okay, so that's actually a big one too, and unfortunately, there's a lot of moving targets there. And I didn't mention that in John and Jan's situation, but like I said, John was lucky enough to have a pension. He was also lucky enough to have retiree medical benefits continuation for both of them. So that's a really great option for some companies we do work with, but a lot of times you may not have that option. So what you're going to do is either you might have a company continuation, or you might have to go out on the on the healthcare marketplace and look at the different options through the Affordable Care Act that's available to you. If you look at it right now, and let's say we're going back to John and Jan with their income level, it's going to be pretty expensive. But if you fast forward and say, okay, wait, we're retired, they focus on what your projected income is. So it's not going to be as expensive as you may think. And then that's going to help them get to age 65. Another option is looking at indemnity plans. You'd have to consult with a healthcare advisor, but where you can actually, sometimes it's a lower cost than the Affordable Care Act would provide. But essentially what happens is you choose one that may pay a multiplier of what Medicare pays. And so it covers a lot of your preventative, but if you, God forbid, have some hospital situations or things like that, it may not cover as much as what the healthcare exchange would. But those are some conversations to have when we run through that cash flow analysis too.
Alrighty, thank you. We're going to breeze through to the second question. What strategies should I consider to reduce taxes on my retirement income, especially if I'm retiring early?
Okay, so retiring early, go back to the John and Jan's example. Some of the strategies would be going back to that slide I showed you with the different distribution options, or how do you take money out. So again, let's say you're retiring early. You don't have to take any money out until you hit your RMD age. So you've got flexibility. Let's say if somebody retires at 60, they've got 13 years or so before they have to take distributions, or it could be 15 if depending upon their age when they retire. But what happens is you can take out distributions and mitigate that tax the tax risk, and we look at each specific year. So for instance, right now we know what tax brackets are for 2024 and like the 2025. We don't know what's going to happen in 2026 and beyond. So we can focus on saying, okay, my tax bracket, let's say right now, is 12%. That's pretty low. We might want to reduce future taxes by taking some money out, converting to a Roth, or taking it out and just parking it. It's your call. Get up into that 22, 24% tax bracket, you can still do so, but that break even becomes a little bit longer. If you're still working, it may be something you wait until you're retired. And it also may be an aspect of if you're still working, maybe we start adding contributions at 401k and a Roth level, or you build up a Roth IRA. There's a lot of different ways to look at it. So there's really not one quick right size answer for everybody. But if we run this cash flow analysis for you, then we can dig into your specific situation and show you some choices.
Alrighty, thank you. Last one, Wesley. If I take the annuity, is there a risk of running out of money since I'm retiring early? And follow up to that, would choosing the lump sum be a better option, for me considering my early retirement?
Okay. Well, actually, the key aspect of taking the annuity is not running out of money. So,
Mhm.
yes, you would not run out of money. But the question is, will you run out of the value of that money? So let's assume that somebody elects a single life annuity, and maybe it pays them $2,000 a month for the rest of their life, and hopefully they live 30 years. Well, that $2,000 is going to be the same for the next 30 years. So as we go on and inflation continues to build up, they're not going to be able to buy as many hamburgers or as much gas or milk or things like that with that same $2,000. So you won't run out of money, but your purchasing power will erode. Worst case scenario is if you take, let's say, a single life annuity, and let's say you pass away in 10 years. Now that company is going to get that money back versus your beneficiaries potentially getting it unless you added a period certain to it. And this gets into a conversation on, specific pension plans. Whereas you take that lump sum, which we mentioned in John and Jan's situation, additional risk there are that you could spend through it too quickly because you have access to it, or you could mismanage it on your own and lose some of it. But generally speaking, if you set up a sound investment strategy, you're able to hopefully match that annuity and get cost of living adjustments along the way. You kind of built in inflationary protection, and then hopefully you've got something still to pass on to beneficiaries as well. So the annuity, no, you do not run out of money, but you need to be cautious about the longevity and inflationary pressure. And that's why it's good to show those different reports side by side for somebody.
All righty, Wesley, that was it. That was all we had time for today. We want to thank everybody for joining us today, and we hope we see you on another webinar very soon. Have a good day, everyone. Thanks,
All right,
Wesley.
thank you. You have a good day.
Bye.